Hey all, Luigi here. I've been playing Last War for about 4 months now, and I didn't really love the content that was out there, the stuff to learn the game. It just felt too scattered. The videos didn't really have all the information that I was looking for, or it wasn't well organized. So I decided to go ahead and start making a couple of videos to hopefully help some folks out. And I'm going to start with talking about everything to do with heroes. I'm going to talk about the types of heroes, the synergies, the best heroes, squad makeups for various content, right? Like the PVE code wars, or code bosses, rampage bosses, arena, kill monsters out in the world and PvP. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about gear, what to craft, when to craft, what the priority is for upgrading and stuff like that. So I'm gonna, I know there's a lot of people at various points in the game, and so I'm gonna timestamp everything if you're interested in one particular section, so that way you can easily find it. That was one thing I didn't really like about the videos out there. It's like I was just interested in one specific thing and had to dig through and try to find the information I was looking for. So with that all being said, let's get right into it. I'm going to talk first again about the types of heroes, right? So we got tank heroes, we got missile heroes, and we got aircraft heroes. And you can see from this handy chart here that tanks receive 20% less damage from missile vehicles. Missile vehicles take 20% less damage from aircrafts, and aircrafts receive 20% less damage from tanks, right? So if you are facing an aircraft squad, you would ideally be a missile squad. If you're facing a tank squad, you ideally want to be an aircraft squad. So pretty self-explanatory, nothing too fancy about it there. Let's get into the rest of this chart is talking about, the synergies here and the damage boost you get depending upon your squad makeup. So you can see, right, if you have 3 heroes of the same type, you get 5%. If you have 3 and 2, you get 10%. 4, you get 15, and 5, you get 20%. So obviously 20% is a big number. So that's generally what you want to do is have 5 of the same hero type. But again, it's going to depend on the content that you're doing. So I'll talk about the squad makeups in the squad section a little bit later if you're interested in that. To explain like when you want to mix and match and what you would do that for. So now that that sort of part is out of the way, let's get into the actual heroes, right? So you can see I have pretty much everything except for McGregor here, which I'll be getting this week. But one thing I've learned as I've been playing this game is that the ultra rare heroes are just way better than the the super rare ones. And anytime you're doing any PvP content, if you're facing a squad with any super rare heroes, generally you're gonna win. I mean, obviously there are some factors involved there, but they're just generally worse, right? In terms of the high damage dealers, right? Like you probably have seen this. Kim, and everything you look at, Kim is like, oh yeah, Kim, you should get Kim. Kim does a lot of damage, and Kim does do a lot of damage. Definitely one of the highest damage dealers in the game. In terms of your tank squad, she's your main damage dealer, followed by Stepman. For aircraft, your main damage dealer is going to be Diva. And then after Diva would be Morrison. So those are your 2 main damage dealers in the aircraft squad. And for missile, as you can see, missile is right now my weakest. Is I'm still working on getting those up. But your main damage dealer is going to be Swift, because there's a good combo with Adam, who's the tank there, and then it's going to be Fiona. So Fiona gets unlocked later on in season 1. for those that may not have seen that here or earlier in the game. So that's really, the main things. Now, in terms of your tank squad, you see, some people, there's a lot of information out there about Mason versus Marshal. Mason is a damage dealer, Marshal is a support. Now, Marshal does some really great stuff for PvP, right? Specifically dealing with, let's see, like, this ability here. I guess it's, what's it called? Rapid Start. Yeah, Rapid Start. So, boosts skill cooldown by 25% and reduces all damage taken by the hero with the highest attack. So this is going to be big, right, in pairing with Kim, because Kim does so much damage that you want to be able to reduce the damage that she's going to be taking. So that's a big thing to deal with there. And then, of course, he also has this command strategy, which increases the attack of all team members, right? So that's pretty big. Now, Mason, everyone's like, oh yeah, Mason's great because Mason has this skill that boosts back row tank heroes damage. But the key thing you want to look at here is that this is only against monsters, okay? And I'll talk about this when we go over squad makeups. He's not good in PvP is the long and short of it, right? And that's the main thing when you look at all of these super rare heroes. If you click on their skills and you read through them, you'll see that everything has to do with monsters, right? So, here's Scarlet, for example. After casting a skill, reduce damage from monsters, right? And Violet here, same thing. Right here, reduce heroes damage taken from monsters, right? So that's why when you're facing other players, these super rare heroes are not great. Of course, like if you're free to play or taking things slowly, you're going to have some super rare heroes. You're not going to have all the ultra rare heroes over time. So, if you are going to take, or if you are going to play with them, right, the most common ones you'll see are Monica, Violet, Scarlet, and Mason. And then Mason, of course, turns ultra rare in season 1, for those of you who are there. But again, his skill does not change. His skill still only increases damage versus monsters, not players. So he's still not someone you want to play in PvP. Yeah, so that's like a bit of an overview of all the heroes and whatnot. I mean, in terms of tanks, I guess I didn't really talk about, I shouldn't say tanks, I should say the frontline heroes. Your main ones for tanks is obviously Murphy and Williams. And then for aircraft, it's Lucius and what is it, Carly, I think it is. Yeah, Carly. And then Adam for missile, and McGregor, who I don't have yet. So let's talk about, actually, you know what? I'm gonna talk a little bit about Lucius here real quick. So Lucius is very good when you're facing tank heroes, right? So we know that, as I discussed earlier, that missile heroes are the best against tank heroes because missiles take 20% less damage from tanks. But Lucius has this added, it sort of like compounds the fact. So he has this ability called Silver Armor. And you can see, or it's actually not even Silver Armor, I'm sorry, but it's actually Knight Spirit, but they're both good, right? So Silver Armor, you can see here, boost damage reduction for the front row heroes by 10%, and an additional 10.5% from energy damage, right? And then he has this other ability called Knight Spirit, which reduce all allies' energy damage reduction by 16.6%. Now, why do I say that this is really good against tanks? It's because the tank heroes, well, they do energy damage, right? If you look at Kimberly's abilities, You can see dealing energy damage, boosts energy damage, And it's the same thing with Stepman here. Stepman does energy damage as well, dealing energy damage, right? Energy damage. So, oftentimes, right, tanks, heroes are probably the most common squad you're going to face in the game. And that's because they're the ones you get access to first. They're the easiest ones to get access to. And having Lucius to sub in when you're facing those tank heroes can make a big difference in you winning those battles. So just something to consider, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the the squad makeups. So that's kind of an overview of the heroes. I mean, there's a lot of info, of course, and I'm sure I probably missed some things that I should have said, but hopefully that gives you a good overview. Now, with that being said, let's talk about squad makeups, right? So generally in the game, you want an all-tank squad, you want an all-aircraft squad, and you want an all-missile squad. And then, depending upon what you're doing, you're going to mix and match those squads, okay? So, and the reason I say that, like when you're facing, when you're doing things like, Marshal's Guard, or you're fighting monsters, or, what do you call it? Doom Elites or Doom Walkers or whatever. You want like as much damage as you can get. And typically that involves having 5 heroes of the same squad to get the 20% damage buff, right? That we talked about earlier. So let's start off with talking about like those code bosses, right? The code bosses, or the Rampage bosses, right? Those events that come up every week where they take extra damage from tank heroes or aircraft heroes or missile heroes, depending upon which one is active. So I'm going to talk about, let's say for example that the tank, boss is up, the one that takes more damage from tank heroes. So this is like my first squad. With all tank heroes, right? And you're thinking, all right, great, yeah, 5 tank heroes, that's the most damage, let's go ahead and send those out. But that's actually not quite true. And the reason is because my frontline heroes here, Williams and Murphy, they don't do a lot of damage, right? They do like negative damage. Their responsibility is to soak damage so that my backline heroes live longer. And you don't need that when you're facing these bosses, right? All you care about is doing as much damage as possible. Your heroes don't take any damage, right? So I don't need any frontline heroes to do this. Now, there's a couple of options that you can do, right? So typically what you want to do is you want to make a squad of your highest damage dealers when you face these co-bosses. Usually it involves having 3 of your backline damage dealers of that type, and then 2 of your highest damage dealers from another type. So for me, that would typically be adding Diva and Morrison, because those are my 2 strongest heroes that do the most damage outside of my tank heroes. Now, that being said, the other thing that you would want to do typically is Marshal here, right? We talked about Marshal being a very good support, increases your damage, all that good stuff. But because these co-bosses are monsters, I would actually replace Marshal with my pal Mason. And again, the reason is because, as we talked about earlier, Mason increases my backline tank heroes damage against monsters. And so that's a big buff, right? So this is typically what I would send for the tank boss. Now, if things weren't already complicated enough, I'm going to add in another wrinkle, right? So I'm in season 1 right now, and you can see that my Kimberly has the new exclusive weapon. So I'm going to pull up Kimberly here and go to the exclusive weapon. And you can see here that her damage, right? So each, in the first ability of the weapon, each critical hit by Kimberly adds 1 stack, energy amplification up to the number of tank heroes in the squad. So you'll notice a lot of things in this game, they're kind of driving you towards, you want the synergies, right? You want all tank heroes, you want all missile heroes, so forth and so on. And so because I have this exclusive weapon, I actually, in my squad, I actually prefer, instead of having Morrison, I'm going to keep Marshal, right? So that way I have 4 tank heroes, right? I'm going to get a 15% bonus buff, and then I'll get Diva, and Diva does way more damage than having a 5th tank hero, right? So that's just like an example of some things to consider when you're doing these code bosses, right? If I was, for my aircraft one, right? So aircraft, I would basically remove both of these tank heroes, and I would add Diva and Statman, right? So this would be as if I was facing, right, and so forth and so on. So that's really the ideal squad makeup when you're facing these Rampage or code bosses, or whatever you want to call them, I guess. So let me kind of set these back up a little bit. The other thing that you'll want to do, of course, when you're facing these bosses is swap your gear around, which is definitely not the most fun thing to do. I would love it if this game had loadouts that you could save to manage all of this for you, so I could just click a button and I could save hero sets and swap hero sets and whatnot. But it is what it is. Maybe it'll be a feature they add later. So yeah, I mean, of course, like if I'm gonna be not using Murphy, I'm gonna remove all of his gear and I'm gonna put it on my my damage dealer here, right? Although my gear is a little I should have I have it set up for arena just in case I get attacked on the defense side of things. So let me put Diva back. Okay. Cool. Perfect. All right. So that's kind of a perfect segue to talk about arena, right? Or 3v3 brawl, or, whatever's active. In arena, there's a couple things that you can do, right? When you click the challenge button, you just get randomly picked against another person, and you fight against them and their 3 squads, and you can move things around. So I guess I'll just show you one, for now. Let's see, hopefully I get paired up against somebody that I can win. Okay, cool. So this I think should be good. So you can see that up at the top there are 3 lineups, and at the bottom is mine, and you can see these little arrows that you can switch around, like which squad is facing what, and you can actually click on them if you want to change anything about the squad, and see what you're up against, essentially. So what I'm going to do is, even though my aircraft squad should be strong enough to kill off his missile squad, even though they counter each other. So I'll line this up like this, and hopefully I'll get 2 wins. Okay, great. So that's in arena. Now, also in arena, there's your defense. So your defense is unique to arena, so you can set this up however you want. And this is where the squad makeups, you can get a little fancy here. I don't have 3 super strong squads. I really only have 2. So ideally, I'd love to have like 3 strong squads. And originally I did have like my missile heroes paired up with some of my stronger heroes and to have like 3 kind of even squads. But I decided to go with like a 2 strong squad approach, and I mixed things up. And the reason I mix things up is, as I described earlier, right? Like each squad has its weakness, right? So if you keep all 3 of your squads, all missile, all tank, all aircraft, it's going to be easier for the person you're facing to line up their they'll line up their aircraft squad against your tank squad, and they'll line up their missile squad against your aircraft squad, right? So they're going to have, the attacker always has the advantage in arena. So it's even though like you can split things up like this, it's still hard to win because the attacker can maneuver things as they see fit. But at least this way they have to think a little bit. Things get a little bit more confusing for them. So I opted for a 3-2 approach, so I get the 10% damage buff. And this way, I have 2 tanks and 3 missiles, and 3 tanks and 2 missiles, and so that way it's it's a little harder for the person attacking. They have to think a little bit and do some maneuvering in order to beat me. So just some things to think about for yourself when you're putting together your squads for arena defense. So that's arena. Nothing too complicated there. And then, we talked about the code bosses, when you're facing other monsters, like in season 1, right? Like you have the virus, and you're trying to kill higher and higher level Doom elites and things like that. So against those, right, again, like those you do need frontline against, but you don't really necessarily need Marshal, right? So like maybe Mason would be better, just to give you more damage against monsters when you're doing things like that. So not too much there on the PVE front. And then in PvP, right, when you're attacking other people's bases and whatnot, there's a lot that goes into it, right? Like it kind of depends what level person you're facing. Can you are you scouting them? Can you see what base, what squads they have defending their base? But one thing I've done, like again, as I mentioned earlier, the most common squad you're going to see is all tank squads. Most people have their main squad as all tank squad because, again, that's like the easiest stuff to get. So, me personally, my strongest squad is also my tank squad. So sometimes what I like to do, is to just add Lucius, right? If I'm facing an all tank squad, like my tank squad's really strong, my Lucius is just as high level as my Murphy. So I'll just throw him in here, and now my whole squad takes way less damage from energy type, which is what tank heroes do. So this is going to give me a significant advantage when facing other people in PvP that are running tank squads. And I've beat people, like right now my base level is 27. Soon to be 28, and yeah, I've beaten level 30s in squads with much higher power than mine because of this, because of Lucius in doing that. So just something to think about for yourself, depending upon what you're doing. So that was a lot, and there's probably even more depth to get into there, but hopefully that gives you a decent overview of what you'd want to do when it comes to your squad makeup. All right, so the last topic I want to talk about is gear. Okay, so gearing is, right, when you open up your heroes, you have these slots for your gear, right? You have the 2 left side stuff here is really based off of the attack, and the 2 right side is for defense. So typically, when you're first crafting, right, when you're first starting off, the main thing you want to do is you want to craft railguns for your DPS, right? Your main damage dealers. So that's step one. And step two would then be to craft your radars for your tank, right? And the radars are going to be this guy here. And the reason, excuse me, the reason you do that is because you can see here, right? Like it adds to defense and HP, but it also, as you level it up, it increases your energy damage resistance. And right, what I say earlier, the most common type of opponent you face is going to be tanks, and so therefore you want to reduce the energy damage you take, right? So first step is railguns for your DPS, followed by radars for your tanks, or I shouldn't say your tanks, I should say your frontline heroes. And then once that's done, you want to craft chips, right? So chips for your attackers. So you can see chips is a little bit of a mix, right? It's hero attack, HP, and then also resistance to all damage types, but it's, a lot lower of a number than what radar does for energy resistance. So you want to craft chips for your damage dealers. And then what I do is then I craft the radars for my damage dealers, chips for my tanks, and then I do the reactive armor for tanks and DPS or damage dealers, right? So that's really what you want to do, and it's a similar upgrade priority, right? So you want to get your railguns to 40 on your damage dealers first, followed by the radars on your tanks, then the chips on your DPS, then the armor on your tanks, and then it's kind of up for debate from there. So I personally, let me see if I can do I have like a good battle defense? Oh, looks like am I getting scouted here? Yep, a little love tap from one of my friends. So let's take a look. I think this one is probably fine. Yeah, perfect. So this is just you can see my whole setup here, and you can see that I've kind of maxed out 40 on a lot of items before I upgraded my railgun on Kimberly, like using the blueprints and stuff like that. You probably don't need to go as far as I did. You definitely want to get 40 on your railguns, on your DP, on your damage dealers. You want to get 40 radar, I think on everyone, and I would get 40 chips on your damage dealers at least, and then 40 armor on your tanks. Once you get that set up, I think at that point you could go ahead and start upgrading your railgun past 40. I opted to get a little bit more to 40, and I think it's just because you get a lot more value for your upgrade or spent upgrading items to 40 than you do just going straight into upgrading. Like sometimes I see people that go straight into pushing the railgun past 40 before like anything else is 40, and I think that's probably not the route to go. But you'll see some different opinions out there, and this is just what I found to be good for me. So that's basically the gear upgrade priority. All right, so let's start talking about leveling heroes up, at least the star level wise. As you can see for me, I have Kim as 5-star, and then I have the rest of my tank heroes 4, and then I have all of my aircraft as 4. So typically, for me, what I wanted to do was to get Kim to 5-star as fast as possible, right? Because Kim just does the most damage. Followed by getting all of my tank heroes to 4-star, because you get a pretty significant boost at 4-star. Now, I mentioned that my tank squad is my strongest squad, and some people might think, oh, well, maybe you should get your whole main squad to 5-star to really, pump the power level there. But the cost to get every hero to 5-star is just, it's a lot, right? And so in my mind, I wanted to have a strong second squad, and so it just made more sense to get all of my second squad, aka my my aircraft squad, to 4-star before thinking about upgrading my tank squad to 5-star. Now I'm in season 2, so the exclusive weapons have been released, and because of that, Diva, I'm going to be getting the Diva exclusive weapon here soon. So I might be getting Diva to 5-star before I 5-star anyone else. But yeah, I mean that's a bit of an exception there. So that's really my star level strategy in terms of the ultra rare heroes. Like in terms of these the non-ultra rare heroes, like you get a ton of Violet, Scarlet, Mason shards, especially in season 1, and Monica as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about those. Like I will say, so once you 5-star a hero, you unlock their wall of honor, basically. So I can go in here and I can promote Mason, and it will just keep adding to all of my tank heroes HP, and then eventually it gets into attack and so forth. What I would recommend is when you do get like Mason to 5 stars is probably like a priority, is what I would say. And then the second you get him to 5-star, just dump all of your extra, your what's the word here? The what do they call the epic hero universal shard. So what I would do is I would just dump all of them into the honor level of Mason, because in season 1 you can make him ultra rare. It will reimburse you for those that you spent to do that. So that's my star level strategy. Highly recommend. I think it's a good route to take. So last topic is going to be skills, right? So every hero, of course, has their skills, and there's a general rule when it comes to which skills you should upgrade, right? And for damage dealers, it's going to be your second skill, aka the top right skill, followed by the top left skill, otherwise known as skill 1, and then lastly your third skill 3. So that's the typical rule for damage dealers. It's 2, 1, 3. For your frontline heroes, it's a little bit different. So for your frontline, it's still your second skill that you want to prioritize first, followed by your third skill, and then your first skill. And the reason why your first skill for your frontline heroes is not as important is because it's like the damage dealing ability for the frontline heroes, and they just don't do a lot of damage. So it's more important to get the defensive skills up first. So that's the general rule. There are some exceptions out there. Like I would say Swift is an example, and for Swift, your most important skill is like for damage dealers, right? It's usually 2, 1, 3, but for Swift, the number 1 ability is actually the priority, and that's because of the Swift and Atom combination, right? So Swift, you can see here it attacks the unit with the lowest HP percentage, and that pairs well with with Atom, who is the tank there, because you can see he only attacks 1 unit. at a very short cooldown. And so therefore that particular unit is going to have less health, and therefore, you can, you have that synergy with Swift. So yeah, I mean that's hopefully a good summary for all things Heroes. Hopefully I was able to touch on all of the main topics. If there's anything you think should be different, or anything you think I missed, feel free to add it in the comments, and I'll try to reply if you have any questions as well. Anyway, thanks for watching.